Thank you, Monica, for that very generous invitation. To President Cam and the wonderful Secretary Gildy Carty, ladies and gentlemen. I come from Brisbane, and we always think that Brisbane's perfect. Was it beautiful one day and perfect the next? Well, this morning I went for a walk through the Botanic Gardens for breakfast after a big night, and I have to say that it was absolutely beautiful. It was a champagne morning in Adelaide. So it's absolutely wonderful to be here. You can never say no to a Rotary Club, ever, for the service you do. And I can certainly never say no to Monica Oliphant either. Ladies and gentlemen, it's an honour to be invited, and it's also an honour to speak about Howard Florey, Lord Florey as he became, and Mark Oliphant, Sir Mark Oliphant. Two boys from Adelaide. 102 years ago, this coming December, a promising 23-year-old medical graduate, Howard Florey, was farewelled from Adelaide, from this city, by a 21-year-old shock-haired science student called Mark Oliphant. Having won a Rhodes Scholarship, Florey, of course, was heading to Oxford to pursue medical research. And Mark Oliphant, too, dreamed of a research career, and he hoped to follow Howard Florey to Britain soon. The fact of this farewell drink, mentioned in passing in Leonard Bickel's book on Howard Florey, got me thinking. Those two blokes knew each other, and it ignited my curiosity. And the genesis of this book, if I have to be honest, Cam, lies back in the deep, dark days as a politician, when I had to prepare a speech on great Australians. And there were many suggestions, and here we are at the Adelaide Oval. Sir Donald Bradman, of course, was one. Suggestions from Bradman to Germaine Greer, Sir John Monash, the great general that many of you would know, through to Farlap, although, of course, the champion thoroughbred was born in New Zealand, as many Australians are, to Rupert Murdoch, to Julian Assange, Professor Peter Doherty, that many of you would have heard, all the way through to Kylie Minogue and the Bee Gees. But Florey and Oliphant, they were both there too. And as I read Bickel's book, it was obvious that these two blokes knew each other, these two men. Australia's not a big country and was even a smaller country a century ago. How well did they know each other, and what were their achievements? How important were their achievements? So I went looking for those answers, and down the rabbit hole I fell, and what I found down the rabbit hole is this book. The most exciting discovery as I researched and wrote the book was the parallel nature of Florey and Oliphant's wartime work and wartime record. That was the most important time of their lives. Let me summarise. Here are two childhood friends from this city, this beautiful city, who went to Britain in the 1920s, and then over the course of just 100 days in early 1940, that's at the beginning of the Second World War, they led respective teams that developed the device critical to winning the war. That's the cavity magnetron that powered microwave radar. They did that. Oliphant's team conceived the powerful weapon that ended the war, which is the airborne atomic bomb, and produced the miracle treatment that enabled countless others to survive the war, which was penicillin. But just hold that for a second. It is extraordinary. Take a second to look at those achievements. In February and March of 1940, early in the war, teams led by Mark Oliphant first came up with this, a workable design for the cavity magnetron, a device that made microwave radar possible. Radar small enough that it could be carried in an aircraft, a bomber, or a fighter aircraft, or a ship or a truck, and much, much more powerful. Up until then, radar was what? Long wave. Those big towers on the east coast of Britain that picked up German planes coming in. Long wave radar, nowhere near as sophisticated. There were 70-metre high towers, the long wave radar, microwave radar, the cavity magnetron could fit in the palm of your hand. Just a fortnight after Oliphant's team came up with that, literally, ladies and gentlemen, literally a fortnight after they came up with the microwave radar, another team led by Mark Oliphant came up with the first proof, the first calculations in a 3-page memorandum for an airborne atomic bomb. It was no longer science fiction. They said for better or for worse, sure, but for better or for worse, an atomic bomb was technically feasible. So Mark Oliphant, in the course of a fortnight, has developed microwave radar, and a fortnight later, the theoretical proof of the atomic bomb. And then a couple of months after that, in May 1940, Howard Florey's team, so just a couple of months after that, still in 1940, Howard Florey's team at Oxford University conducted trials on albino mice with a substance they successfully extracted from mold, penicillin, and demonstrated that it killed bacteria entrenched within a body. It killed infection. For all of human history, infection, humankind was virtually powerless against bacterial infections and infected wounds. They killed billions of people over millennia. But here finally was a magic bullet. It was a absolute revolution in human healing. So over this dramatic 100 days in early 1940, Florey's test, incidentally, coincided precisely with the evacuation from Dunkirk. The evacuation from Dunkirk, the British Expeditionary Force. While that was happening, Florey was conducting the mice experiments and securing one of the greatest technological breakthroughs in human history. It's absolutely extraordinary. But their contribution didn't just end there. That's scientific discovery. But it's more than that. Just as importantly, since besieged Britain had no spare industrial capacity, Florey and Oliphant had to enlist America's industrial and technological might for their cause, for the Allied cause. Great Britain could not make the radar, make the bomb, and make the penicillin. Is that clear? They had to go elsewhere to get someone else to do it, and it was the United States. So in another 100-day burst of activity, a year later, in mid-1941, through their tireless lobbying and advocacy across the length and the breadth of the United States, they managed to convince the sceptical and reluctant and still neutral United States to take these breakthrough inventions and make them to realise their full potential during the course of the war. Is everyone following that? So it wasn't just the inventions themselves, it was then the advocacy for that in the United States. It was pretty easy with microwave radar. Everyone knew what an edge it would give to pilots and sailors if they could see enemy targets in any weather, day or night, in far greater detail, far greater discrimination. The smaller the wave, the better the definition, the better the discrimination. Many nations were trying to develop microwave radar. It was very secret, and 7 or 8 nations were trying to develop microwave radar. But they couldn't come up with a device that was both small and powerful enough to produce microwaves. No one could do it. When shown the cavity magnetron for the first time in late 1940, the Americans were shocked, and they dubbed the cavity magnetron the O tube. What do you think O stood for? Oliphant. O stood for Oliphant. For a while in America, it was called the Oliphant tube, microwave radar. They couldn't believe its power. And when they did, they threw everything they had at it and developed, of course, they considered the most significant technological innovation of the Second World War. And just, if I can just add lib a little bit, people often think of the atomic bomb. People often think of the atomic bomb as the most significant innovation. All the generals, including Richard Rhodes, who wrote the great book about the atomic bomb, he said compared to radar, the atomic bomb was a sideshow, which is extraordinary, isn't it? That's how important radar was. It changed warfare, in particular the Battle of the Atlantic, quite frankly. But penicillin and the atomic bomb were very, very different. Oliphant and Florey had managed to persuade British authorities of the potential of these discoveries, the atom bomb and penicillin. But the problem was that Britain, besieged by the Luftwaffe and the U-boats, didn't have that industrial capacity to make the bomb. They just couldn't do it. And they certainly couldn't make penicillin either. Only the United States could do so. So across they went. So mid to late 1941, a year after the exciting initial discoveries, we have another period of 100 days where both Florey and Oliphant, unbeknown to each other, flew across to America to get the Americans to build the bomb and to make penicillin. It is an extraordinary story. When I came across this, I was saying this to Monica before, and to Cam, that serendipity, I think was the word you used. I didn't know anything about it, but they were both there at the same time, talking to some of the same people to get America to build the bomb and make penicillin and produce microwave radar. Florey was there between July and September, and Oliphant between August and October 1941, knocking on doors, arguing, lobbying, hassling the very courtly Americans, as they are, telling them that they had to produce penicillin and they had to produce the bomb and do it now, because otherwise the Nazis might get there first. Quite right, madam. That's quite right. And I talk about it in chapter 9 of this book, in a chapter called, you like this, Aussie Stirrers. I think the poor courtly Americans were taken aback. It was tough, but much tougher than you think. Both penicillin and the atom bomb sound obvious to us today, sitting here. But at the time, Florey and Oliphant didn't have much with which to persuade the Americans. There was Oliphant in America trying to persuade a neutral country to spend billions of dollars building a nuclear weapon and essentially relying on a 3-page memorandum by Frisch and Piles, two German Jewish scientists, relying on that to persuade the Americans to build an atomic bomb. Yes, the British had not field tested, they had, what do you call when you scientists have it, what's the word I'm looking for? Peer reviewed, that's it. It had been peer reviewed by Sir George Thomson's Maud Committee of top scientists. And the British said, this bomb will work. But the Americans said, no, it will not. Okay? Yes, in the future it may work, but not now. It won't. We haven't got the ability to make it right now. And famously, the US committee charged with the task didn't believe in it, and so didn't look at nuclear bombs. Instead, they looked at nuclear energy. Boilers, not bombs. That's what the uranium committee set up by President Roosevelt did. So don't believe, ladies and gentlemen, it was all about Robert Oppenheimer and the Oppenheimer film. I know the British, let alone the Australians, don't get much of a mention in that film. I did notice that. But it was Oliphant's team that provided the proof that what Oppenheimer was building would work. That came from a bloke that was born here. You know, it wasn't Robert Oppenheimer. It was an Australian-led team that did it. It was tough. But if you think that was tough for poor old Mark Oliphant, try being Howard Florey. He turns up in the United States, and his brief is to persuade the Americans to manufacture penicillin. Just imagine turning up to the United States to persuade Pfizer or Merck or any of the great American pharmaceutical companies. And he says, look, I've got this dusty brown powder in this test tube, right? And I've used it. And they said, and Dr. Florey, how many patients have you tried this on? Six. Six. And they said, oh, okay. And how efficacious has it been, Dr. Florey? How useful is it? Oh, well, 2 of the 6 died. But it's very effective on albino mice. You know, he was lucky because you can't imagine anyone turning up and trying that stunt today. And so by the time both Florey and Oliphant left the United States and returned to Britain, they had no idea at all whether, in fact, their advocacy would work. They had hoped it would, but they certainly weren't. They were not sure. And in the end, ladies and gentlemen, it was actually a very close-run thing. Both Florey and Oliphant found powerful advocates who, in the end, persuaded the top decision makers to take on these big scientific and technological challenges. Over 2 extraordinary days, in early October 1941, 2 meetings took place involving a bloke by the name of Vannevar Bush. He was the man tasked by President Roosevelt with weaponizing scientific research for use during the Second World War. That was his job. At the first meeting, Bush effectively orders, the first meeting in October 41, Bush effectively orders the American pharmaceutical industry to mass manufacture penicillin as the highest priority, despite its wafer thin case history. I mean, who would invest in a company? Would you invest in Merck if that? No, you wouldn't. But they thought it was worth the shot. That was during war. It was worth the shot. Necessity is the mother of invention, perhaps. And the very next day in October, Vannevar Bush met with President Roosevelt in the White House, and he tells Roosevelt that the British believe the atomic bomb can be made, and made now with existing technology. A hastily convened scientific review subsequently confirms British science, and on the 6th of December, the day before Pearl Harbor, Roosevelt gives the go-ahead for the Manhattan Project. It's the day before Pearl Harbor. After the war, Vannevar Bush wrote that World War II was the first war in human history to be affected decisively by weapons that were unknown at the outbreak of hostilities. Weapons unknown in September 1939. Does anyone follow me? And affected decisively by weapons unknown at the outbreak of war. These breakthrough weapons were principally microwave radar and the atom bomb. Indeed, the commonly expressed view was that while the atom bomb ended the war, it was microwave radar that won it for the Allies. And penicillin was the miracle treatment that enabled countless casualties to survive it. And it's these two childhood friends from this city, from Adelaide, who led the teams responsible for these breakthrough innovations and whose subsequent advocacy ensured that their full potential would be realised in time to affect the course and perhaps even the outcome of the Second World War. I believe, and I argue this in the book, this is probably the greatest, certainly the most consequential story that has never been told in Australian history. People heard of David McCulloch. He's a famous American historian. He died recently, and he wrote a book. He said in one of his books, I think it was the book about the Wright brothers, about powered flight. He said he wrote that book not so much because he wanted to write it, but because he believed that it should be written, that it needed to be written, so Americans better understood their achievements. For me, the story of Oliphant and Florey is a story that had to be told. It's a great story of Australian achievement and Australian consequence. Here were 2 men who lived lives of great purpose and who were never happier when they were in their laboratories seeking to uncover nature's secrets. In doing so, though they hated war, both of them hated war, they had a major impact on it. For certain, absolute certain, the greatest conflict in human history would have been longer and more bloody without them. It would have finished later and maybe not even with the same result. Oliphant and Florey are the two most consequential Australians of the Second World War, perhaps of all time. We, as Australians, might even learn as much from their great spirit as from their marvellous achievements. Thank you.